We're speaking to Richard Lucas from the Scottish Family Party.
So what you like about the BBC, and we usually do, they do give us a little bit of airtime at elections, which is great. And this time this classed us as one of the larger parties that we're quite flattered by as well. So last night I went along to the studios in Glasgow for the Nine for an interview. Let's see how it went.
The pro-marriage, anti-abortion party was set up 5 years ago, and this is the first time that they've campaigned in the local elections. And there are 84 candidates. So what did this relatively new party believe? Well, it doesn't have a national party manifesto and is instead giving local candidates what they call the freedom to build around the party's priorities, which include avoiding council tax rises. They say the current system penalises families. Another is encouraging new housing. But ultimately, it's the reforms to education which are taking centre stage. And to give you a rough idea of what that means, they don't agree with the Scottish Government's policies on sex education, and they reject schools teaching pupils that they can choose their own gender. They say a more traditional approach is needed and the current system is too progressive.
Well, that's fair enough. OK, they use anti-abortion rather than pro-life, but you know, it's the BBC. That's what's going to happen. You don't get to write the script. Talk about our new housing policies. There's a bit more to our housing policies than that. We've got policies about where houses should be built, you know, brownfield sites rather than damaging the environment, existing areas. Education policies cover lots of different areas, but they very much focus in on the most controversial sex education and gender issues. OK, it would have been nice to talk about the other things, but OK, fair enough. They're distinctives of our party. But they got it right about sex education. We object to the Scottish Government's resources. And the gender issue, teaching children they can change gender, I just think it was great to be able to say that on television, because that's a message that's so rarely heard.
And Richard Lucas from the Scottish Family Party joins us now. Thank you very much indeed for coming in to see us. So when you talk about families and policy to preserve the family, does that encompass all families, single parents, same-sex parents? What's your position?
Our policies are designed to promote the interests of everyone in society, all children in society. So any household with children would benefit from a lot of our policies. Having said that, we do believe that children being brought up by their natural parents is the ideal. And we want to maximise the number of children who benefit from that early experience. You know, that's a very controversial thing to say, but for us, the well-being of children comes before avoiding controversy. To the last point there, I thought maybe I should have answered that at greater length. On the other hand, with interviews, I always try and be concise. I don't think it's good when the interviewer is having to cut you off and stop you talking because you're going on and on. So I try and be quite concise. But maybe I could have expanded on that. But just the first question, I thought what I said was perfectly reasonable, and it was a reasonable question. So on we go.
You have in the past had to deny that you are anti-LGBT, that you are anti-gay, and you have said in the past that you have no views on same-sex marriage. But a couple of things within your manifesto on the website might make people question that position. You say that people should be free to seek private counselling regardless of whether the therapy is intended to maintain or desist sexual desires. You don't support fertility treatment for anyone other than male and female couples, and you oppose the LGBT inclusive education programme. And I know we'll get into that a bit in a minute, but can you understand that perhaps from that people might think that you do take a position on that?
I think this is a very polarised debate in society. The first thing you mentioned there was the conversion therapy ban concept. We believe that people should be free to seek counselling to pursue their own life goals. So if, for example, a married man with children, married to a woman, started experiencing homosexual attractions, and he thought to himself, I don't want to go down that road. I want to move away from these homosexual attractions. I want to maintain my relationship with my wife. I believe that man should be free to seek counselling, and to seek counselling from someone who agrees with him, who says, yes, I think that is the right vision for your life. I share that. Let's see how we can take this forward together.
Even though that's largely discredited, it's often a traumatic experience for people, and it's something that the Scottish Government want to ban next year. You still think that that has a place in society?
Well, absolutely. I think a lot of the research that's presented on this basically is unreliable. It's a very poor quality. If we've got a higher quality research, it doesn't bear out. There's some ludicrous claims made about this. What I described then about that man seeking counselling with someone who agreed with his life decision, that's described in the Scottish Parliament routinely as a form of torture. Which is laughable, utterly laughable.
Well, some people do find it very traumatic, don't they? We have, accounts of people who have found going through that process very damaging. Do you appreciate that for some people that is is a damaging, traumatic experience?
I think someone seeking a form of counselling in order to fulfil their own vision for their life is something that people should be free to do. Now, it's obviously in the interests of activists. Some people don't like the idea of anyone thinking, I would rather not go down that route. They don't like that idea. So it's in their interest to present the most dramatic stories possible of the damage done and the trauma it caused, etc. Whereas I believe for a lot of people, it's a simple matter of freedom in pursuing their own vision for their own life.
Okay.
That happens in interviews sometimes. Someone asks a question that brings in several issues. In that case, brought in 3 issues, and you know there's not time available to talk about each one of them to explain the party's point of view. So what I did there was just pick one of them, pick the first one, spoke about that, and I thought that was perfectly fine.
Can we talk a bit about your position on the family? You feel that the state should interfere less with family life, and you would look to repeal the smacking ban. Why is that?
Well, we feel that the parents should have the right to employ that form of discipline if they wish. I mean, in England, there's no smacking ban. In lots of other parts of the world, there's no smacking ban. We feel it's the state imposing its own ideals of parenthood and its own ideals of how to bring up children on parents.
So,
we feel that the Scottish government has a very narrow vision.
Why should the state back off from that? But on abortion, you say that that should be reduced. You reduce the current 24-week limit of abortion, prevent abortions on the ground of disability after 24 weeks. So why is it okay for the state to have a say in one and not the other? You know, is having an abortion not an ultimate private, personal decision, and one that the state doesn't have any place in?
I really fail to see the connection between those issues at all.
I'm just saying that in terms of state intervention and making private choices about your family, why would one be different from the other?
Again, I still don't see the connection. But to talk about the pro-life issue, I value all human life, before and after birth.
Yeah.
So that's a matter of the gravest moral consequence. And so when it comes to the law, I believe the law needs to defend the lives of unborn children.
But you're not for the opt-out system for organ donation. So you don't believe in the preservation of life there, even though organ donation could save a life.
I don't believe our organs belong to the state. I'm registered as a donor. I think it's a great idea to encourage people to become organ donors. That's a very noble thing to do, but it should be voluntary.
Okay.
The state doesn't own our organs before or after.
Okay.
That was an interesting chain of questioning. When Laura first started the how come you want one thing to be legal and another thing to be illegal line, my mind immediately thought, right, one response to that is, well, obviously we have to decide on a case-by-case basis what should be legal and what should be illegal. There's no general principle that says things should be illegal if they're private or things, it just doesn't make sense. So I thought of trying to explain that. And I thought, well, that's maybe a bit dry. I'm not sure that's going to be particularly interesting for people to listen to. So I'll just give a straightforward pro-life answer. What could have come to mind as well, because I've seen memes about this, etc., is the idea that I could have said to her, so what you're asking me basically is why do you think it's okay for parents to give a naughty kid a smack, but you don't think it's okay for a baby to be torn limb from limb in the womb shortly before birth just because they're disabled? Is that the question you're asking me? That would have been quite challenging. I then could have said, when Nicola Sturgeon comes in next week or whenever for her interview, are you going to say to her, how come you don't think it's okay for parents to give naughty kids a smack, but you do think it's okay for a baby to be torn limb from limb in the womb shortly before birth just because it's disabled? Now, I think that would be a really tricky question for Nicola Sturgeon. Would the BBC dream of asking that? Of course not. Of course not. Because as far as they're concerned, that question just doesn't even enter their mind. So they think, they're catching me out with that question. But the really tough question should be the one they could have asked Nicola Sturgeon. But that just doesn't enter the BBC's thinking. Now, having said that, had I have thought of that line to go down, in terms of people who watch clips on Twitter, they might have thought that was really great. In terms of general viewers, I sometimes think people don't like that sort of thing. They don't like seeing people challenged and put on the spot and maybe a bit embarrassed and feeling uncomfortable. They think somehow that's not quite nice, and I'm sort of bullying her a bit or whatever. So in terms of the general viewer response to the interview, maybe it was best the straightforward line I took rather than the other option there, but who knows?
All families, regardless of their constituent parts, are struggling with the cost of living. How are you going to help?
Well, I think councils need to focus on the basics, to avoid council tax increases or maybe even to decrease council tax. Now is not the time for the pet project, for the wouldn't be nice if we. Now's the time to focus on the basics and avoid increases, and also to refrain from imposing additional charges on people as well, be it motorists, be it your garden waste or whatever. Now's not the time to be introducing those things. Councils need to
talk about council tax, because you've got some ideas about what you would change with council tax.
We have. There is a sense in which council tax penalises families, because families, larger families in particular, need a larger house. So people on a certain income with a large family need a bigger house, so they'll pay more council tax. A couple with less children might live in a smaller house and spend their money on, going on cruises or fancy holidays or whatever.
I don't think many of them are going on cruises or fancy holidays just now. All families are struggling, but okay.
Well, no, to be honest, all families are not struggling. There are a lot of people who are quite wealthy, and lots of people have still got excess money to spend.
So would you say a council tax break according to the number of children? Is that how it would work?
We haven't looked into details of that, but we think the principle of offering a local income tax even, instead of council tax, but the very idea of a property tax tends to penalise people who need a bigger property, which tend to be bigger families.
Okay.
Well, it was nice to be able to talk about one of our sort of more general policies there. That's good.
Let's get on to education, which is a big part of your policy as well. So you'd abandoned curriculum for excellence, and you have particular concerns about how sex education is being taught in schools. Can you tell us about what concerns you have?
Where do I start? There's so many things. For a start, it's too graphic and detailed, too young. I think the message presented is that 12-year-olds and upwards have the right to have illegal underage sex. I know that sounds like a bizarre contradiction, but that's exactly the message that's presented through the government's sex education resources. I think
that's your take on how those resources are. And
that's not a wild interpretation. That's a very straightforward reading of what the resources teach.
Right.
I think the consequences of early and promiscuous sex are not presented to young people. It's more a message that sex is something you can do when you feel like it, and as long as you feel like it and you consent, then that's fine. And I don't feel that's the best message. I think if young people are looking at the whole trajectory of their life, then the decisions they make with regard to sexual relationships in their teenage years can be very influential through that. And I don't think they're provided with the right information in order to make informed decisions.
Would you appreciate, though, that teenagers growing up now are having a different experience to when you and I were growing up, in terms of the information that they have access to, the content that they can access, often without their parents' knowledge, and therefore would it not be remiss of schools to take a realistic approach to what young people are in fact experiencing?
Now, everything you said there I completely agree with, but the question is what is the message in response to that? Like, pornography is very freely available, but I don't believe the right message to deliver in schools is that pornography is nothing to feel guilty about. It's fine to look at pornography. It's fine to masturbate to pornography. I mean, that is the message that's taught in schools quite explicitly. I mean, masturbation is promoted in some of the videos, not just talked about, promoted to young people. And I just don't feel that's a healthy message. Now, I've taught sex education. When it comes to pornography...
And when you did, you wouldn't talk about masturbation? That wouldn't be something that you would...
I would talk about anything and everything. But the message will be different. So with pornography, I mean, there are lots of dangers associated, lots of risks. And I also believe it's a moral question as well. If you look at what pornography tends to do to people's perception and attitudes to women, I think that's a very serious issue. So for the Scottish Government to be telling children that it's fine, it's nothing to feel guilty about, it's something that it's okay to watch pornography, I think that's the wrong message morally.
Yeah, okay.
Had a very brief chat with Laura before it started, and she said she'd watched other interviews I'd done with the BBC, I assume. And I think in the light of that, she'd been very careful not to misrepresent our policies. She articulated it quite carefully, what our view was. So that was very good, and I think I really had an opportunity to put forward our case. There's always 10 times more you could say. You just gave a little fraction of it. That's what it's like being on this sort of interview. But at the end, was Laura a bit convinced? Was she agreeing with me? Maybe.
Can we talk a bit about your position on gender? You don't support gender quotas. You said that councils should not use their limited resources to address equal pay claims. So are women not entitled to fair pay? They certainly are, and that's already what happens. You referred to the issue with the councils. I mean, Glasgow City Council lost about a third of its annual budget to one of these equal pay claims. And just to outline what happened, is a group of ladies
saw the jobs available at the council. There were grave diggers, there were school cleaners, there were dinner ladies. They chose the jobs that they wanted to do, knowing that they were paid a bit less than some of the other jobs. They chose the jobs they wanted to do. And then decades later, a clever lawyer came along and said, you can actually sue the council because you got paid less than the people who did the jobs that you decided you didn't want to do. Now, I think there's no justice in that at all. And saying it cost Glasgow City Council a third of its budget, over £500 million. So when you look at the public services in Glasgow, I think a lot of the museum buildings have had to be sold, a lot of the leisure facilities. That's a big factor in it. I don't think that was a matter of justice. I think it was a matter of opportunism.
Okay.
The question like that, my first thought is, am I going to be allowed enough time to actually answer this and clarify it? And I was worried I wouldn't be, but I thought I'd go for it in any case. And credit to Laura, I was given the opportunity to present the case very briefly. One slight slip I made, I referred to dinner ladies, which was a bit of a blunder because obviously men could apply for those jobs. I'm sure they're not called dinner ladies anymore. So anyway, that was unfortunate, but probably no one noticed.
You didn't get any seats in the Holyrood election. What would constitute a good result for the Scottish Family Party this time round?
I wouldn't rule out that we'll get a council. It's not impossible. I wouldn't say I was expecting it, but it's not impossible. But we're a very new party. We get very little media exposure. We appreciate being here tonight. But we're in this for the long term. So we're building up awareness of the party. More and more people are meeting representatives of the party, coming across us, hearing our message on different subjects. So we're just hoping to build up our support in the years, who knows, in the decades to come, towards our ultimate goal of representation in the Scottish Parliament.
Okay. Richard Lucas, many thanks.
Thank you. What's always foremost in my mind when I'm asked questions like that is the next election. Because if you watch the clips from Anna Sawa of Scottish Labour and Alex Salmond of the Alba Party, when they've been in similar interviews, they're asked those questions, the interviewer brings up a quote. Because Alex Salmond or Anna Sawa, they're saying, we're going to have a big breakthrough this time. There's going to be a big step forward. You just wait and see. The interviewer brings out a piece of paper and says, that's exactly what you said last time. It didn't happen. What's different this time? Then they have to explain that. And to be honest, I think people undermine their own credibility. Whereas I feel the approach I took there hopefully comes across as sensible and reasonable and realistic. And then when people look at your policies, they'll interpret them as well as policies from a party that's sensible and realistic. Now, I think there's an inevitable psychological factor in anyone who stands for election. That always the thought dawns on you, what would happen if I won? You imagine what it would be like if you won. And especially the first time you stand for election, it's possible to get carried away and think, oh, this is it. I've spoken to so many people who say they're going to vote for me. I really think I'm going to win. Well, I'm not ruling out. As I say, I think we might get some councillors elected. Let's wait and see. So I'm going to say I'm expecting it. But the important thing is to manage our expectations. And as we build up, we grow and grow and grow. And that's the important thing. So for all our candidates, say by our 84 candidates, that's what gave me the opportunity to be in the BBC studio that night. And that's raising the profile of the party all around the country. And that's a part of the process towards, as I said, ultimately filling the void in Scottish politics by putting Scottish Family Party MSPs into the Parliament.